Hey guys! In today's video, I'm going to be going over the study tips and organization systems that actually worked for me in high school and helped me graduate with a 4.0 unweighted GPA. I promise that if you follow all of these tips to the fullest extent, you'll be able to ace all of your classes. So my first category of tips is organization. Having a good organization system in high school is essential because you're going to have so many important dates, assignments, and assessments to keep track of. If you don't organize both your tasks and your materials, you're likely to fall behind, especially in harder classes. Sometimes your teachers will require you to have certain supplies, so having one consistent organization system for your files in high school isn't going to be that easy. But for the classes in which I did get to choose my organization system, I used one folder, one notebook, and one binder per class. I took the folders and notebooks with me in my backpack, and I left the binders at home to organize papers that I didn't need to bring to school anymore. Whenever I got a handout in class, I put it in my folder in chronological order, with the newest handouts on top so that I could access them easily. I also completed all my handwritten assignments in chronological order in my notebooks. I used chapter and lesson numbers to label my assignments in my notebooks, but now, looking back, I wish I also put the dates down. And as for the binders, once I didn't need to bring certain papers to school anymore, I hole punched them and placed them in my binders, which were organized by subject, and were also organized chronologically. This way, I would have access to the papers later on when I was studying for tests and exams. I especially recommend doing this for your AP classes because AP exams go over literally everything you've learned in the course, so it'll be helpful to have old papers when you're preparing for them. However, the most important form of file organization that I used in high school was my digital file organization, because most of my assignments had to be turned in online, especially for my English classes. Essentially, I had one folder per grade level, and within each of the grade level folders, I had one folder per subject, and I would put my assignments for those subjects in those folders. I was also in a lot of clubs during high school, and I needed to organize lots of digital files for my clubs as well. You also need to organize your time during high school, so I used a planner for this. My favorite planner that I ever used was this Mead planner. It's very small, but it was the perfect size for me to write down my homework assignments, due dates, test dates, and other important things. This planner has a monthly view and a weekly view, so I could see how busy my months were going to be, while also being able to plan my day-to-day tasks in the weekly view. After writing down everything I needed to do each day, I ranked each task so that I knew what to prioritize. For instance, if I placed the number 1 next to a task, that meant that it was the most important or the most time sensitive, so I needed to complete that task first. And if I placed the number 2 next to a task, I would do that task second, and so on. Once I got home, I would always check my planner first thing while having a post-school snack, and then I would begin with the first task. I usually never let myself watch YouTube or go on my phone until I finished all of the tasks for the day, and I think building this habit really helped me to stay on top of my game in high school. Obviously, there are always days when I don't feel like doing much and I end up scrolling on my phone for a while after school, but I tried to keep those days to a minimum, and I also tried to stay ahead in my classes so that I wouldn't be behind if I skipped a few hours or even a whole day of after-school work. So now I'm going to move on to study tips that helped me while preparing for chapter tests and for exams. So first, I had a 1-week rule that I always held myself to, which meant that I would always begin studying for a test or quiz 1 week before I had to take it. So on the first day of studying before a test, I would basically just focus on getting my study materials organized. So this means printing out practice tests, creating my flashcards and Quizlet sets, organizing the notes that I needed to look over, and making note of the concepts and problems that I originally struggled with so that I would focus on those things more than the concepts and problems that I found easy. Then, on the second day, I would complete the passive forms of studying, which are rewriting my notes and rereading them. Even though these things are considered passive and they don't make too much of a difference, I always enjoyed doing this because I was able to pinpoint concepts that I didn't quite understand yet, and I was also able to make my rewritten notes neater than my in-class notes. Then from the third day up until the day of the test, I stuck to doing active forms of studying, including testing myself through flashcards and doing practice problems. It always varies from subject to subject, but I usually build it up each day until I'm basically doing nothing but studying for the test by the time there's one day left. It's also important to complete your other assignments during the first 2 days of studying, because otherwise you'll be sacrificing the quality of both your assignments and your test prep later on. It also becomes more difficult when you have more than one test coming up, so that's why it's important to manage your time properly. I can't tell you how long you have to study for because it literally just varies from person to person. I personally had to study for way longer than most other people in my grade. I would study for about 7 to 11 hours a day, while someone else would study for 2 to 5 hours a day, and we would both end up getting the same score. So I guess you just need to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. My next tip is to know your grade breakdowns. Each of my classes in high school had a completely different grade breakdown, but usually you can find this information by either checking your syllabus or by checking your grades that are posted online. For example, some of my classes had a total points system where you would get points on each assignment or test, and the sum of the points you received would be divided by the total number of points possible, and then that would become your final grade. However, I also had classes that used weighted grades. So for example, homework assignments would be worth 20% of your final grade, while tests would be worth 80%. It's important to know how your teachers are going to evaluate your final grade because you'll be able to calculate what scores you need to achieve in order to get the final grade that you're aiming for. And it can also help you know what you should be prioritizing because obviously you would want to put more time into assignments and tests that are worth more points or are weighted more. So this next tip is specifically for essays and projects, but basically you need to have the grading rubric out next to you while you're completing these assignments, and you need to make sure that you include literally every single thing that's on the rubric. For example, if the rubric says you need to include demographics in a research report, then make sure you include demographics and make it obvious. Don't just include something vague. This will make sure that your teacher won't miss it when they're grading your work. My next tip is to do extremely well during the first 2 weeks of school. This doesn't mean that you can slack off during the next few weeks, but it does mean that you don't have to be stressed about bringing your grades up, and instead you'll just be able to focus on maintaining your grades. Also, the content that's taught during the first 2 weeks of school is typically much easier than the rest of the course, so this is a completely achievable goal. These next few tips are some that I wish I did more effectively during my time in high school because I think they would have made my life a lot easier. So the first one is to surround yourself with people who have the same work ethic and morals as you, because this will really help your mental health and keep you more sane during stressful times of the year. You should also have friends who you can turn to whenever you're having difficulty understanding something, but stay away from people who just want to exchange answers. The next tip is to avoid memorization and to actually make an effort to learn the material, because this saves a lot of time when you're trying to study for your AP exams if you're taking any. And finally, just make time every day for something that you enjoy, because otherwise you're definitely going to get burnt out more often, and I know this from experience. I really wish I maintained my reading habit during high school because now there are so many books that I really need to catch up on. I hope these tips were useful. I couldn't include every single positive thing I did in high school because that would have taken way too much time, but I think with these main pointers, you can really become more successful. If you try any of these tips, please give me feedback and let me know if they worked for you. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.